There ain't nothing wrong with you, shitbox. Oh, looky there! I've got weapons and everything. What's up you Friday night? Come on, you fucker! I'll shoot you right here. Get a shot.
If you have 100,000 cows that calve a little less than once a year, so we'll just assume that they each have a calf in a year, and half of them are bull calves. So that would be 50,000 bull calves that have to go somewhere.
The average age of a dairy cow in the United States is 42 months. They don't even use years because they don't get that far.
It's been a degree of deflection to say, well, the industry's changing itself, so we don't need to pass the law, and well, there's a handful of these that operate in Vermont anyway, so is it really that big of a problem? My answer to that is, if something's wrong and it shouldn't exist, and you either think it doesn't exist or doesn't exist that much in the state, what is the harm with passing a law saying you shall not do this?
It's not good. It's not good, it's not humane, it's not right.
There's been a reliance on the impression that Vermont doesn't have the scale of problems, so there isn't the need for legislation. And I think there's also a viewpoint that industry will respond to consumer changes, and they will fix problems themselves, and they don't need a law to tell them to do that.
Vermont produces about 2/3 of all of the milk in New England. In general, if a farm is breeding using normal production practices, they might have not quite a 50-50 ratio, but slightly more bull calves born than heifer calves.
You have dairy cows, female dairy cows that produce milk. They have to be pregnant essentially once every year or so in order to continue to produce that milk, just as in humans. They respond to being pregnant by producing milk that then is consumed by us in the form of dairy products. The result of that is that roughly half of the offspring of those pregnant dairy cows are male. They obviously can't produce milk, so there has to be somewhere for them to go.
Nationally, about 15% of bull calves go into a market channel that's called bob veal. So those calves aren't fed out, they're simply shipped as very young calves to a slaughter plant.
I unfortunately have renamed Vermont from the Green Mountain State to the Two-Faced State because they love that reputation about local food and healthy and happy animals and all that good stuff.
A lot of what takes place in an agricultural setting is completely hidden from the public. One of the reasons we have so many humane issues with farming is the scale of the farms that exist now compared to 30 or 40 years ago. We have many fewer farms, but the size of those farms and the number of animals on those farms have increased dramatically. And I think it's natural to say that when you're dealing with, instead of hundreds of animals, tens of thousands of animals, that your concern for the welfare of individual animals is going to be less.
Traditionally, the desired characteristic of veal was to be a very light-colored meat, and so veal raisers would titrate the iron in the diet very closely because they didn't want the calf to have so much iron that the meat would turn red. Other markets prefer what's called rose veal, and so that doesn't have to be restricted quite as much. It's okay for the calf to have some other sources of feed that may naturally carry more iron than milk does.
The white veal, that you actually have to make them a little sick to keep it that way.
One of the issues we faced is that process of raising a calf for those 15 to 16 weeks till they can go to slaughter often involved them being confined to a stall that didn't allow them to turn around, made it very difficult then for them to stand up and lie down correctly. Often they were tethered in a way that they couldn't they couldn't turn around even if they had the space to do so. It was really a cruel way for a young calf to be housed for a brief period of time, but a very stressful and cruel way to treat an animal and immobilize it, basically. So that's something that we've worked on. We've tried to pass laws in other states. 9 states around the country have banned that type of confinement for veal calves. When you go to slaughter, that's a very stressful time for calves. Many of them are still, because of being confined, because of that they're still young, they have difficulty moving, walking, getting to the slaughter location. And we've seen lots of cases where those calves have been abused along the way, treated cruelly, subjected to prodding, to electrical stimulation, bolts of use of electricity to prod the animal, kicking, clearly abuses of both federal law and federal intent, and also state cruelty laws. When you're taking animals that are in a vulnerable state because of their age, but the profit incentives are the same for them and an older cat, you want them to get them through, it just makes it a lot more likely they're going to be subjected to cruelty along the way that goes above and beyond the questions of should we be killing animals to begin with. There are certainly lots of people who view this as a business and who, like I said, want to get as much utilization out of everything, as every animal as they can. So and to cut corners wherever they can. We see this in all areas of business. I mean, there's companies all over the place that try to skirt regulations, that try to get by with doing a little bit less, that try to take advantage of a lack of oversight to get away with something. So I think it's reasonable to expect that it's occurring in places that we can't see, that the animals are being still, particularly in the slaughter process, not treated humanely.
Demonstrators gathered in Montpelier today to take aim at the operator of a Grand Isle slaughterhouse. Bushway Packing was shut down last month for alleged animal cruelty. We, as an Humane Society of the U.S., we employed a undercover investigator in mainly the months of August and September of 2009 in response to some complaints that we had received from the facility, some of which from former USDA inspectors who had raised concerns about what was going on there, and employed a person to work there for about 6 weeks, filmed some pretty graphic video of what was taking place, animals being kicked, pulled, prodded with electrical prods. You're supposed to stun an animal, render them unconscious before you slaughter them. Being done in group settings where they were not clearly all evidence was that they were not either rendered unconscious, or that they were likely, by the time they were slaughtered, not still unconscious state. One animal video being attempt to being skinned while he was still alive, and joking, the employee of the facility joking to the USDA inspector that that they shouldn't be seeing this because they could shut them down for this. Just a lot of casual banter between the USDA inspector who was on site and the employees of the slaughter facility, including one of the co-owners who was seen participating in the abuse. That video was provided to the USDA and the State Agriculture Agency, as well as being released publicly. The case itself ended up was prosecuted. The co-owner pled no contest, I believe, to a misdemeanor animal cruelty charge, and agreed to some community service and time. One of the employees that was seen doing, I would say, some of the more graphic abuse was convicted, aggravated cruelty charge. Neither of them, I believe, served any jail time, but they were both prohibited, in addition to some other penalties, from being involved in animal livestock husbandry operations into the future. The facility itself was shut down for about 5 months, but then two of the other owners, who our organization felt, quite frankly, should have known and probably did know of what was taking place there, and so it was unfortunate. But they were allowed to reopen the facility under another name. The source clearly of veal is the dairy industry. It is the male byproducts of the need to have milk-producing dairy cows that creates the veal industry. And it's unlikely, to say the least, that you're going to end the dairy industry. So with that as a starting point, and that is maybe the realistic understanding of reality, what can you do to make the lives of calves better? And that's where we get into things like ending the confinement, the use of stalls to confine those calves for however many weeks of their lives that they have before they go to slaughter, having proper standards for slaughter to make sure that they're not being inhumanely killed or being cruelly tormented in the process of going to slaughter.
There's no need for it to be a horror story. It just doesn't have to be that way.
Your personality is what you exhibit to people when you know somebody's watching. Your character is what you are when you don't think people are watching.
At the end of the day, utilizing non-dairy products and considering a vegan lifestyle that doesn't involve animals in agriculture and both their direct use and the products that come from them is an ideal way to reduce animal suffering and humane treatment of animals. I'm sure there are plenty of people who drink milk who also find veal abhorrent, because the idea of eating a young, weeks-old animal just strikes them very, very as a morally wrong thing to do, but yet will drink milk, not probably even realizing that those two things are really, you can't do one without inadvertently supporting the other. Or you can't drink milk without inadvertently supporting the veal industry.